They say a child will set themselves on fire just to feel the warmth of a parent's approval. I spent 38 years burning, and my father never once told me I was bright. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't absent. He was there for every milestone, every achievement, every moment that mattered. But his presence was a shadow, and his silence was a verdict I could never appeal. I chased his pride like a man dying of thirst chases a mirage. And on the day of his funeral, standing at that podium with a church full of people waiting for me to speak, I realized I was about to eulogize a ghost. A man I'd known my entire life but never truly understood. Until a letter changed everything. Welcome to my Reddit diaries, where every story reveals the unseen battles within families. Don't forget to subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The rain came down in sheets that afternoon, streaking the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church with rivers of distorted color. I stood at the podium gripping notes I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, staring out at a sea of faces I barely recognized. My father's friends. His colleagues. People who apparently knew him in ways I never did. The casket sat 10 feet in front of me, buried under white lilies that made the whole room smell like a garden built on grief. They say you should speak from the heart at funerals. But what do you say about a man whose heart you never truly knew? I was 8 years old the first time I learned that joy required approval to feel real. It was a Thursday in March, and I just won the regional spelling bee. I can still remember the weight of that trophy in my hands, the way the gold paint caught the gymnasium lights, the sound of my teacher's voice saying my name over the microphone. I ran all the way home, bursting through the front door with my chest heaving and my face split open with pride. My father was in his chair reading the newspaper. He didn't look up. Dad, I won. I won the whole thing. He turned a page. Good. Now focus on your math grades. My mother tried to celebrate. She made my favorite dinner and put the trophy on the mantel. But the victory had already gone cold. I stood in front of that mantel that night staring at the golden cup and wondering why it didn't feel like winning. 4 years later, I made the school basketball team as starting point guard. My father came to one game. He sat in the bleachers with his arms crossed, watching me play the best game of my young life. At halftime, I looked up to wave at him. His seat was empty. I found out later he'd left to beat the parking lot traffic. That night, I asked him what he thought of the game. Basketball won't get you into college, he said, not looking away from the television. Hit the books. I practiced free throws in the driveway at midnight after that, the ball echoing off the concrete like a heartbeat. I told myself he might come out and watch. He never did. When I was 16, I got accepted into a prestigious summer science program at a university 3 states away. Only 30 students in the country were selected. I showed him the acceptance letter at dinner, my hands shaking with excitement. He read it once. Handed it back. Your cousin got into MIT at 16. You're catching up. I watched other fathers at the airport the day I left for that program. I saw them hug their kids. I saw pride in their eyes, tears, hands that lingered on shoulders like they were memorizing the shape of their children. My father dropped me at the curb. The car was still running when I pulled my suitcase from the trunk. The night before I left for college, I found him alone in the garage. He was organizing tools on his workbench, the way he did when he wanted to think without being interrupted. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I found the courage to ask, "Will you ever be proud of me?" He didn't turn around. His hands kept moving, arranging wrenches in order of size. The silence stretched so long I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. Then he spoke, his voice flat and distant. "When you become someone worth being proud of, you'll know." I waited for more. There wasn't any more. One day, son. One day. I drove away the next morning while the sun was still low and orange on the horizon. He didn't come out to say goodbye. I graduated college magna cum laude. He didn't attend the ceremony. He sent a card that said, "Congratulations," in my mother's handwriting. When I got my first job offer at a major firm, he said it was a start. When I got engaged to Sarah, the love of my life, he told me to make sure I could provide for a family first. On my wedding day, he gave a toast that praised Sarah's grace, her intelligence, her family. He mentioned me once. Said I was lucky to have found her. He was right about that. But it wasn't what I needed to hear. By the time I turned 32, I had everything a man was supposed to want. A career. A wife. A son of my own. James was 3 years old, all wild curls and gap-toothed smiles. I watched myself praise him for a finger painting one afternoon, my voice enthusiastic and genuine, and something inside me cracked open. I realized I'd become obsessively affirming because I knew what the alternative felt like. Sarah noticed. She always noticed. "You're trying to prove something to someone who isn't even here," she said quietly. She was right. But I couldn't stop. The call came on a Tuesday. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I remember sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot after visiting him for the first time, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I thought maybe this would be it. Maybe facing death would soften him. Maybe he'd finally say what I needed to hear. I visited every week for 5 months. I brought James sometimes. My father lit up around James in ways that felt like looking at a photograph of someone else's family. He'd smile. He'd laugh. He'd get down on the floor to play with toy cars, his movements slow and careful, his eyes bright with something I'd never seen directed at me. One afternoon, I heard him tell James something that stopped me cold. "Your daddy was always so serious," he said, ruffling James's hair. "You be different. You be happy." I stood in the doorway listening to those words and thought, he never let me be happy. 3 weeks before he died, I tried one last time. He was weak by then, his body eating itself from the inside. I sat beside his hospital bed and asked the question that had lived in my throat for 38 years. "Dad, I need to know. Was I ever enough?" He looked at me with eyes that were tired and distant. "Why do you need me to tell you what you should already know?" I left the room. I got in my car. I drove home and held my wife while she told me it wasn't my fault. But it felt like my fault. It felt like I'd failed some test I never understood. We didn't speak again. 10 days later, he slipped into unconsciousness. 3 days after that, he was gone. And now here I was, standing at a podium with rehearsed words that felt like lies in my mouth. How do you eulogize a ghost? How do you mourn a man you never truly had? I looked down at my notes, at the sanitized version of our relationship I'd prepared for public consumption. I looked at the casket and felt nothing but emptiness. I opened my mouth to deliver those rehearsed lies. And that's when I saw Robert Mitchell stand up in the back row. Robert Mitchell was my father's college roommate. I'd met him maybe 5 times in my entire life, always at family gatherings where he'd shake my hand and tell me I'd grown. He was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, the sort of person who seemed to carry other people's stories with care. I watched him walk down the center aisle of that church, moving slowly through the rows of mourners, and something in his expression made my throat tighten. He stopped at the front row where I stood frozen at the podium. In his hands was a weathered manila envelope, the kind that looks like it's been carried around for months, opened and opened again. "Your father asked me to give you this after the service," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think you need it now." I took the envelope. My hands were shaking. The funeral director appeared at my elbow, professional and discreet, and gestured toward a small room off to the side. I nodded, unable to speak, and followed him away from the podium and the waiting congregation and the casket that held all my unanswered questions. The room was small and plain, just a few chairs and a table with a box of tissues. I sat down heavily and stared at the envelope in my hands. My name was written across the front in my father's careful block letters. The paper was worn at the edges like it had been handled many times. I opened it. Inside was a letter, several pages folded together, dated 6 months earlier, right after his diagnosis. I recognized his handwriting immediately, that precise engineer's script he'd used to write grocery lists and birthday cards and notes on my childhood report cards. My vision blurred as I read the first lines. "If you're reading this, I'm gone." And I probably never said what I needed to say. I never could. Not to you. I had to stop reading. I pressed my palm against my mouth and tried to breathe. Then I kept going. I kept every trophy, every report card, every newspaper clipping of your achievements. They're in boxes in the attic. I looked at them more than you'd believe. I thought if I praised you too much, you'd become soft. Entitled. Like the kids I saw who crumbled at their first real challenge. I thought I was forging steel. I didn't realize I was building a wall. The door opened quietly. Robert stepped inside and sat down across from me. He didn't say anything at first, just waited while I tried to process what I was reading. "He called me the night you won that spelling bee," Robert said finally. "You were 8 years old. He said, 'My boy won today.' He said he didn't know what to say to you. That he froze." I looked up at him. "What?" "Your father grew up with a tyrant." Robert's voice was gentle but firm. His father was a decorated colonel. Brilliant man. Demanding. Impossible to please. Your dad brought home straight A's once in college before I knew him. 1 A- in organic chemistry. His father told him that A- was weakness. I thought about my father sitting in his chair, not looking up from his newspaper while I stood there holding a trophy. I'd always thought he didn't care. The possibility that he cared but couldn't show it had never occurred to me. He promised himself he'd never be cruel like his father, Robert continued. So he chose silence instead. He thought withholding criticism was the same as being kind. He didn't understand there was a third option. I looked back down at the letter, my eyes scanning the words I'd waited my entire life to read. "I watched you play basketball that night. You were 12. I left at halftime because I was crying in the parking lot. I didn't want you to see me emotional. I thought fathers were supposed to be strong, composed. I didn't realize strength could look like pride." Robert leaned forward. "He framed your college acceptance letter. It hung in his office at work for 20 years. He'd show it to people. New hires, clients, anyone who'd listen. He was so proud he couldn't shut up about it. Just never to you." The words kept coming, each one landing like a stone in water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew. Your wedding day. I wrote a different toast. 7 pages about my pride and love for you. I threw it away at the last minute. I thought it would embarrass you. I thought you'd see it as weakness. I gave that safe toast instead and hated myself for it. He wrote that toast longhand, Robert said. I helped him practice it in his hotel room. He cried 3 times reading it through. Then he crumpled it up and said nobody wanted to hear an old man get sentimental. I couldn't stop the tears now. They came hot and fast, blurring the words on the page. I wiped my eyes roughly and kept reading. I see you with James. I see the father you are. You're everything I should have been. You tell him you're proud. You hug him. You show up fully instead of standing at a distance. You broke the cycle I couldn't break. And I'm so proud of you for that. I'm proud of the man you became despite me, not because of me. Robert handed me a tissue. I took it without looking at him. After you left his hospital room that last time, Robert said, after you asked him if you were ever enough, he called me. He was sobbing. He said he'd done it again. He'd given you nothing when you needed everything. He said he wanted to call you back, to tell you the truth, but he didn't know how to start. Why didn't he? The words came out broken, barely a whisper. Pride. Fear. The same things that stopped him your whole life. He thought he'd already ruined it. That anything he said would sound like too little, too late. I looked at the letter again at the final paragraphs. I kept thinking I had time. That one day I'd find the courage to say this to your face. But time is the cruelest thing. It convinces you there's always more of it. If you're reading this, my one day never came. So let me say it now, in the only way I have left. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. You are the best thing I ever made. Even if I failed at showing you. I love you, son. I'm sorry I made you doubt it. I sat there in that small room holding my father's words, and I felt something break open inside my chest. Not pain exactly. Something closer to release. Like I'd been holding my breath for 38 years and was only now remembering how to exhale. There are boxes in his attic, Robert said quietly. 3 of them, labeled, my son. You should see what's inside. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. My father was 10 feet away in a wooden box, surrounded by flowers and silence. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I knew him. I stood up, walked to the door, looked back at Robert. Thank you, I said, for giving me this now. He nodded. He loved you more than he could ever say. I hope you know that now. I walked back into the church. The congregation had waited. They looked at me with concern and curiosity as I approached the podium. I placed my hands on the wood and looked out at all those faces. Then I looked at my father's casket. I need to tell you who my father really was, I said, my voice steady despite everything. And I need to tell you who I thought he was. Because the truth is, I never knew him at all. Not until today. I put away the notes I'd prepared. They didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the truth, and the truth was written in my father's careful script on pages I held in my trembling hands. The church was silent except for the rain drumming against the windows. I looked out at the faces watching me and realized they were waiting for permission to understand a man who'd kept his heart locked away so carefully that even the people closest to him never saw inside. My father never told me he was proud of me. Not once in 38 years. My voice carried across the rows of wooden pews. I spent my life believing I wasn't enough. That I'd failed some invisible test he'd set for me before I was even born. But today I found a letter. And in that letter, my father told me the truth he couldn't say when he was alive. I unfolded the pages and began to read. He wrote, I kept every trophy, every report card, every newspaper clipping of your achievements. They're in boxes in the attic. I looked at them more than you'd believe. I thought if I praised you too much, you'd become soft. Entitled. I thought I was forging steel. I didn't realize I was building a wall. My voice caught, but I pushed through. My father's father was a tyrant. A military man who measured love in accomplishments and found everyone lacking. My father grew up learning that affection was weakness. That distance was strength. He promised himself he'd never be cruel like his father. So he chose silence instead. But he didn't understand that silence can be its own kind of cruelty. I read more from the letter. About the spelling bee. About leaving the basketball game because he was crying. About the acceptance letter he kept framed in his office for 20 years. About the wedding toast he wrote and destroyed because he was afraid of appearing weak. He was proud when I won that spelling bee. When I made that basketball team. When I got into college. When I married Sarah. When I gave him a grandson. I looked up from the page. He was proud of all of it. He just couldn't tell me. And I spent 38 years thinking I wasn't enough. I saw people wiping their eyes. Saw heads nodding in recognition. Saw the weight of unspoken words reflected in faces throughout that church. My father wrote these words near the end. I kept thinking I had time. That one day I'd find the courage to say this to your face. But time is the cruelest thing. It convinces you there's always more of it. If you're reading this, my one day never came. I had to stop. Had to breathe. Had to gather myself before I could continue. So let me say it now, in the only way I have left. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. You are the best thing I ever made. I love you, son. I'm sorry I made you doubt it. The silence that followed was sacred. The kind that holds grief and understanding in equal measure. I folded the letter and placed it on the podium. Then I walked to the casket and put my hand on the polished wood. Thank you, Dad, for finally telling me. I heard you. A week later, Sarah and I climbed the narrow stairs to my father's attic. There, exactly where Robert said they'd be, were 3 boxes labeled in my father's handwriting. My son. Inside was my entire life preserved like artifacts in a museum. Every trophy. Every newspaper clipping. Photographs arranged in chronological order. The 7-page wedding toast, creased and stained. And a journal. 30 years of single-line entries. August 14, 1997. He made the team. I should have told him I was proud. May 22, 2003. Watched him graduate today. Wanted to hug him. Didn't. November 8, 2015. He's getting married. I'm losing my chance to tell him. I sat on that attic floor surrounded by evidence of a love I'd never seen and cried until there was nothing left. 5 years have passed. I visit my father's grave regularly, sometimes with James, who's 9 now and full of questions about the grandfather he barely remembers. We plant flowers. We sit in the grass. We talk. I framed the letter. It hangs in my office where I see it every day. I donated most of the trophies to a youth center with a note in memory of a father who cared more than he could say. But I kept the journal. I read it when I need to remember that love isn't always loud. I started writing letters to James too. 1 each year on his birthday, to be given when he's grown. They all start the same way. I am proud of you. Here's why. Last week I watched James in his school play. He played with a tree. He had one line and forgot it. Afterward, I picked him up and held him close. I messed up my line, Dad. You stood on that stage. You were brave. I'm so proud of you. He looked at me with those bright eyes. Really? Really? Always. And in that moment, holding my son and speaking the words my father couldn't, I felt the cycle break. The silence ended. The wall came down. My father promised to be proud of me one day. That day came at his funeral. Too late for us, but just in time to save the next generation. His silence taught me to speak. His hidden love taught me to love out loud. His failure became my lesson. I carry his words now like a second heartbeat. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. And every time I tell my son I'm proud of him, every time I hug him or show up or speak love into the open air, I'm honoring the father who couldn't. I'm finishing what he started. I'm proving the cycle can break. My father's greatest gift wasn't his pride. It was teaching me, through the cost of his silence, how essential words truly are. He showed me what not to do. And in doing so, he showed me exactly who I needed to become. Some people love you more than they can ever show. Sometimes the validation you seek comes too late. But even late truth can set you free. My father broke his silence too late for us. But just in time for me to break it for my son. The words that were missing for a generation are now freely given. And that, finally, is something to be proud of. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to my Reddit diaries for more stories about the hidden battles within families. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me about a time words, or the lack of them, changed your life. Your story matters, and this community is here to listen.